Strange Shadows, a Clark Ashton Smith podcast.
As he studied the slowly changing configurations of the starts in the huge reflectors of his ether ship, the Alcyone, Captain Volmar was now seized by a memory of his younger years, when he had been first officer of the transatlantic liner. He recalled the broken mists and unclouded icy sapphires of night when he had watched the pole star from the vessel's bridge. For now, amid the scattered flecks of light that formed the rearranged and scarce identifiable constellations, a single flaming point had begun to emerge beyond the rest, and was taking on the proportions of a remote sun. And this point, as he knew from his astronomical chart, was Polaris.
Hello friends, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of Strange Shadows, the Clark Ashton Smith podcast. The voice you just heard was Jeff Goad from the Appendix N podcast, and he was reading the first paragraph from the story we're covering today. I'm one of your hosts, Rob Poynton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes. Yeah, today's story is a bit of an anomaly in the Smith world because, as we've discussed before, he doesn't often have many returning characters. But this time we do. We get a returning character, and it's our favourite Captain Douchebag, isn't it?
Yes, Captain Volmar, who's not the most sympathetic of characters, is he really?
He's really not.
No, as we discovered, it was Marooned in Andromeda. That was episode 14 in season 1, in case you missed that. And yeah, he's basically the captain of an interplanetary spaceship. And in that story, we found him marooning some of his crew who he took a dislike to, just leaving them to die on the planet, basically.
You lot off. And then he turns up at the end and realises that he can't pilot it on his own. He goes, come on, you can come back. And they all do. It's just like...
Yeah, so this was a recurring character, and it was something that Smith was, well, we'll get into that, but he was sort of asked to write a series of these, wasn't he?
Yeah, Wonder Stories editor David Lasser, after the success of Marooned in Andromeda, asked Smith to write a series of follow-ups. And this story was completed in late August 1930, while Smith was on a camping trip in the Sierra Mountains, which he wryly told HPL that the magnificent scenery is more likely to be a source of distraction than inspiration, except in retrospect, which is interesting. But then he later changed his mind, saying that probably the mountain scenery was a stimulant to my writing, but it was so tremendous that it temporarily altered and confused my sense of values. Mere words didn't seem to stand up in the presence of those peaks and cliffs, but now, amid the perspectives of familiar surroundings, the red world doesn't seem so bad. So yeah, Smith wasn't actually a big fan of this one. It's another one he was kind of down on. But,
yeah, you get the feeling this was, I don't want to say churned out because it's by no means churned out, but it is one of those that is writing for money, I think, rather than enjoying the process as well as getting paid for it, hopefully.
Yeah, well, he didn't enjoy the process, and I think that was the problem. It had probably, which is, and again, strange saying considering what we know about a lot of Smith's stories and how tumultuous their publication histories were. This is probably the most so far.
Wow.
Yeah. He finished the story, as we said, and he sent it off to Mr. Lasser, who promptly sent it back, asking for revisions because he wanted more action in the story and bemoaned the fact that the first page was wholly like descriptions. It was, you know, Smith's style. You get these beautiful descriptive passages, but for the type of magazine, he just wanted a punchy action story kind of thing, you know. Smith was less than enthused, as you'd imagine, but he made some changes nonetheless. He sent it back, and Lasser rejected it.
All right.
You know, and that was basically it for years and years and years. He didn't do anything with it. He eventually sold the story along with another one to a fan in New York by the name of Mike DeAngelis, who sounds like a villain in a DC comic or something, doesn't he?
It does.
Yeah. Apparently he printed a pamphlet of a few poems of Smith's before, the sort of fanzine kind of thing. But basically, DeAngelis vanished, taking the typescripts with him. He just vanished off the face of the earth. It's believed that he had sold the typescript for Like Muhammad's Tomb to another Brooklyn fan, but it remains at this time still lost.
Wow.
Numerous attempts to locate DeAngelis were made over the years by Smith, Derleth, Roy Squires, and various other people, but all met with failure until Ron Hilger thought to contact DeAngelis's co-editor for the fanzine Asmodeus in March 2003. And this guy located a typed copy of the story that he had prepared for publication in their fanzine and was basically kind enough to return it to the editors of the volume we're going for.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. So its first publication was the title story. Its first publication was as the title story of the collected Volmar stories by Nightshade Books in 2003.
Yes, I was going to say, when looking around, I did find that copy on sale. Although I don't know if it's still in print or out of print, it was certainly commanding a high price on Amazon.
Yeah.
And Nightshade Books, of course, as Tim said, are the people who put out this excellent 5-volume collection that we're working from for this series, the unexpurgated texts of Clark Ashton Smith's weird fiction.
Yeah. So that's the one bonus of yet another sort of bonus of the modern way. If anything gets lost, you've always got it in your sent folder, haven't you? You know?
Well, that's it. That's why all my drafts of stories I message between a couple of my Facebook accounts. There's always something in the cloud, you know. And it always amazes me when you read back in these letters how these guys used to send manuscripts to each other. Presumably not always originals. Were they sort of copied manuscripts? Or
I imagine they were carbons. I imagine they were the carbons. Yeah. It's I was, funnily enough, I've just got back from a convention. I was talking to an old fantasy writer whose name escapes me at this moment, but they've been writing like stuff since the 80s. And he told me this story. He'd wrote this really gory short story and sent it off in the post to a magazine. And it ended up, the postman got the address wrong. It was one of the things like, you know, I'm on Conway Court. They sent it to Conway Road. It was one of them. Yeah. And it ended up in the hands of this little old lady. It's this story full of blood and guts.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Okay, so that's the publication history. Shall we go into our favourite words?
Indeed. Yeah, we got a lot of returning old favourites in this one. It's Fulgurant makes a return. Yes,
and sacerdotal, which I think we had last time as well, didn't we?
Yes, and I'm still upset that it's not filthy. Yeah.
We've got a few new ones, though, and the one that really stood out for me that I enjoyed the most, the meaning is quite obvious in the context of the text. Burglarious.
Nice.
As in burglary and theft. I'd never heard that before. Burglarious.
Yeah, I think I've seen it in Hodgson or something. I think it's in one of the Karnakis. I think I've spotted that before. I think that's the only place I've ever seen it before was in that. Yeah. I've got a quotidian, which can either mean daily or mundane.
I also picked up intersidereal.
Nice.
Which basically means between or among the stars. It's just another way of saying interstellar.
Yeah. Etiolated, which I may have had before, but I like it, so we're having it again, which is pale or drawn out, as in plants, as in fronds, like pale fronds. And it can also mean feeble in the context of a person.
That's nice. And sticking with the astronomical theme, I nearly said astronomy domini there, with interstellar overdrive. We also have aphelion, which is a planet's point furthest from the sun in its orbit.
Now that's one I did know because the band Scandroid have done a song called Aphelion, and it's also a Doctor Who audio drama.
There you go. You're bound to know that. Then.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of knew it from Perihelion, which is the opposite. That's the point nearest, which was the name of a Deep Purple album a few years back.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yeah, the final one that jumped out at me was anaglyph, which is a stereoscopic photograph with two pictures laid on top of each other.
Ah,
And it can also be a bas relief, an offset cameo embossed in low relief.
nice, nice. Well, I've just got two to finish then. Well, one is a word I kind of had to look up. I'm pretty sure I knew what it was, and I was sort of right. Typhonian.
Mm-hmm.
And Typhon, of course, is from ancient Greek myth, is a kind of snake dragon, almost vaguely Cthulhu-ish creature. Yeah. And the other one, which I just love the sound of, was quintillions.
Nice. Yeah.
And we'll come to that when it's in context. That was quite a nice little sentence, that a nice phrase.
Yeah, just finally, before we move on, we've got to mention that you could probably play HP Lovecraft Bingo with this one because it contains some of Lovecraft's favourite repeated words. We've got gibbous, we've got cyclopean, and we have eldritch.
That's almost a full house in itself, isn't it?
It is, isn't it?
If we can get a bit of gibbering in there and something squamous, then...
Yeah, squamous. Yeah. Rugose.
Okay, so yes, we're back in outer space. We're on the ether ship, the Alcyone, which, by the way, I'm not sure if we mentioned this before, but Alcyone, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a star in the constellation of Taurus. It's the brightest star in the Pleiades group. And in Greek myth, Alcyone was one of the daughters of Atlas. So that's the background to the ship name. And once again, we're under the command of the good Captain Volmar. Now, this first paragraph, I thought it's very nice. It's quite evocative.
Yeah.
But again, I think as with the last time we saw this ship, I couldn't help but be put in mind of Star Trek.
Absolutely. Yeah. And since you mentioned it when we covered Marooned in Andromeda, I was reading this and they were in Star Trek uniforms in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I saw them in the coloured tunics, the works. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's very much that thing of equating the Enterprise to the old sailing ships and the Pole Star in particular. I'm sure that was mentioned in that thing in Star Trek.
Yeah. Volmar is the officer of a transatlantic liner, which for me, it sounds like he's shipping fish over to the States. But, you know.
So he wasn't working. What's the old Scouse joke? Was he working? My father worked for Cunard.
Yeah.
So did mine, yeah. We won't go into that. So, yeah, but it's that direct association between ocean-going vessels of their day and then these space, as we call ether ships, because that idea was current then of space being filled with ether, almost semi-liquid kind of material, I guess.
Yeah, which always makes me think of the Me-Go.
Yes.
They're described as ether wings, aren't we? They're thin, membranous wings.
Yeah, and, well, we're going to talk about Me-Go a little later on because there's some similarities here, aren't there?
There is, yeah.
Now, the other thing I got from this that was quite interesting, and something that came up last time with his character, was he's got an almost religious fervour about his calling. For him, this isn't just a matter of exploration and voyaging. This is something far deeper.
Yeah. A well-nigh sacerdotal consecration to an ideal was lit as with a reflection of the approaching orb. He watched it with the thrill of a mystic devotee as well as the eager curiosity of a scientist.
Yeah, so it's nice how Smith, well, I guess that's what he does in a lot of these stories. He marries that scientific approach, but also there's this unknown mystic, sometimes almost supernatural element as well.
Yeah.
And what did you make of this? Because I thought this was an interesting choice of words, well, typical Smithian, really. He felt a renewal of all his pristine ardours, together with an actual sense of consummation. I mean, that could be taken a couple of ways, couldn't it?
Oh yeah, especially as the old phrase for somebody who's getting a bit horny, for want of a better term, cool your ardour, and then consummation.
It almost sounds like he's sort of in his chair going, "Whoa!"
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? He's getting a bit worked up. The Victorian euphemism, about to have a bit of a crisis.
So yeah, obviously this is a very important thing to him.
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps that goes some way of explaining his behaviour before, because that was not really the behaviour of a scientist. Well, it was almost like a fit of temper, wasn't it, when he
Oh, it
marooned his
was.
crew?
Yeah.
A fit of pique.
Peak. Yeah, which he quickly regretted. Yeah, he's irascible, I think, is probably the mild way of putting it.
And we get that nice connection again because, of course, Polaris is the pole star, which, because of its position directly above, or pretty much directly above the North Pole, and the Earth's rotational axis, stays pretty much in place. I mean, comparatively speaking. So for centuries, that's been the guiding light, if you like. So yeah, the pole star, of course, it's the North Star in Ursa Minor. In medieval times, it was called the lodestar or Stella Maris. And for every culture, this has been a constant. In fact, in some cultures, it was called the unchanging star. So it's kind of nice that this is what he was navigating by back in the day. Or at least being very aware of and watching, and now he's actually approaching that same star.
Yeah, I love this line at the end of the second paragraph. I just think it would make a great title for a Hawkwind best of. A decade of cosmic voyaging.
Oh, yes.
That's got to be the best of for a space rock band, doesn't it?
Well, I'm going to pinch that for my band Sirius Rising, because we're a space rock. Yeah, cosmic voyaging. We're cosmic voyagers, man. In fact, we do have a song called Cosmic Dancer. So there you go.
Hey.
And we get a couple of returning characters as well here, don't we? I remember Roverton.
Roverton. Oh yeah, because he's the one who has the really British reactions to things, isn't he? Yes. The one I see in Tweed. Yeah.
Yes, as we see later on in this, he gets a great line. And we get Jasper, who seems to be the pilot or the driver. And Jasper says, we shall pass Polaris in about 4 hours, sir. Shall we keep the straight course to the left? And Volmar says, no, steer to the right, because he wants to go and take a look at Polaris. And I like here that Jasper turns the heavy steering rod of neo-manganese steel, and the vessel responded with inconceivable lightness. The idea that you've got these big, heavy kind of steering rods for something that's in outer space, which requires very little energy or thrust to actually be moved. That was interesting.
Again, it's that sort of brass tubes and glass orbs, very, that Victorian look at space travel. That's the Victorian view of the future, isn't it? I'm a bit sad that we're not living in that, to be honest.
I think it'd be jolly good if we were. But
it'd be much more aesthetically pleasing than all the fucking concrete and steel that we've got everywhere, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, but the idea that the ship has power steering, I think it's an interesting...
It has airbags.
So they set the course for Polaris, which grows larger and larger. And as they get closer, 3 planets come into view. Now, the first 2 are obviously uninhabitable. They're too close to the star. But the third one looks like it might be, they may be able to land on it.
This world, even as seen from afar, was plainly remarkable. It glowed with a deep red that was both sullen and fulgurant, in opposition to the livid grey of the other 2. And since it revolved in a far ulterior orbit, at a distance where the reflected light of Polaris should be proportionally feeble, the brilliance of its ruddy lustre was mysterious and difficult to explain.
Yeah, because this is the strange thing with this planet. There's no geographical features. It just seems to be a glowing red orb or sphere.
Yeah.
With nothing there. There's no mountains, there's no rivers, nothing at all. Just this red.
Yeah, it's almost like a bauble on a Christmas tree. That's how I kind of saw it. One of them big, shiny red glass jobs that you used to get told by your granny, don't go near it, it's breakable. One of them,
That's right. The sort that used to get packed away and then use every year for 20 years.
Yeah, in the newspaper in a box, yeah.
So they dip into a descent to go towards what they describe as the monotonous ball that is now directly beneath. And they're just a mile above the surface. And they say it's larger than Mars, though it lacked the dimensions of Earth or Venus. But it is this perfectly smooth ball, or it looks like it's covered perhaps in some sheet of luminous and deeply tinted copperish metal. So again, this starts putting me in mind of Star Trek, especially as we go on, where you've got the planet is on the inside of the planet. You know, those kind of episodes. Or again, the other thing that sprung to mind here was like a Death Star kind of setup.
Yeah. It's almost like if we have the ozone layer, if that was like made of glass or something.
Yeah. So they descend a little bit further till they're almost touching this ruddy plane. And now they see that the surface is apparently made of innumerable tiny darting sparks and coruscations, interweaving like a dance of fiery atoms at a speed which the eye could hardly follow. So this is not a sort of solid metal shield as such, but you get the impression almost like some sort of like a force field, perhaps.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, like you see in like Transformers, Cybertron's got this sort of energy shield around it. So it's almost like that, I think.
And this is where we get that line I mentioned. It looks like a million quintillions of red-hot filings chasing each other in a field of magnetic force. That's our friend Roverton. Always got a nice turn of phrase.
He does, doesn't he?
A million quintillions. I can't help thinking that's not very scientific, is it? You can't imagine Spock saying something like that. but it is good.
It'd be hilarious if he did, wouldn't it? We've got another great line in this in the next paragraph. Volmar's studying the surface of the planet, and he says that directly below the vessel, the gyrations of the dazzling particles were becoming slower. Gyrations of the dazzling particles.
That's nice.
Now that's brilliant. Yeah.
Again, Smith is very good with the I mean, an editor might complain about this being descriptive, but it's descriptive with a capital D, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, this isn't mundane description. This is really nicely written.
That's it. It's not just filler or fluff. But it all paints the picture. It's that poetic background again, isn't it? Coming to the fore. And yeah, I mean, I've had editors before. You do like a fraction of something like that. Oh, it's too purple. Can you imagine a modern editor faced with Smith's work?
Well, I mean, kind of nothing happens for the first 2 pages, so that'd be out, wouldn't it, really? But yeah, it establishes such a nice atmosphere, and it's very filmic to me. This is very visual. I can picture this as a film or as a Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
Again, you think of those Star Trek episodes. They turn up to the planet, and you've got that 60s red sort of colour in the view screen and all that. I still can't help thinking that Roddenberry must have read some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, even early Doctor Who, you can imagine William Hartnell popping out the TARDIS on the ship here and having an argument with Volmar as they're going onto the planet, and he's going, "Don't go down there, you fools!" the sort of thing. I could see it. Yeah.
So as they're hovering there, they see this movement beneath this gyration, and a pit opens up, and basically they get pulled in by a tractor beam.
Yeah.
Pulled down through this shield and into what is revealed below as the actual world itself. So now we can see the world as it is. And that brings us into chapter 2. So despite putting full power into the engines, and he mentions brakes and levers again, which is nice. You can almost hear like when the tube train brakes, that kind of noise. That's what I'm hearing for that.
Yeah.
But the tractor beam just drags them down relentlessly.
Yeah, and as they go through it, there's another great description, which could be a band name or an album title, because they go through the fiery substance which arcs above them, like the cope of some unnatural metallic heaven.
Oh, metallic heaven! That's got to be that's got to be a Metallica tribute band, isn't it? Actually, that has reminded me the best name I ever saw for a tribute band was for a Metallica band, and it was Metal IKEA.
I've seen Metal Liquor.
So they get down below this force field, and we see the planet laid out below. And again, we get a huge amount of description here of colossal plains, immense plots of ground with pavements of silver and cinnabar and lapis lazuli. There's many belts that suggest water, others that give the impression of many tinted vegetation. So it's a little bit like previous descriptions. It's all very animal, vegetable, mineral, isn't it? Or sometimes a mixture of all three.
Mm.
And they're actually heading down towards, there's these sort of piles of, well, they're not sure, or we're not sure if they're structures or cities, but they're large towers, colossal architectural piles.
Sounds unpleasant, doesn't it?
That's going to take a lot of tubes of ointment.
Preparation H.
And they land on this diamond-shaped roof, which is outstretched below in multiform and labyrinthine patterns of 100 hues.
Mm.
And they're a little bit worried because they're coming down quite fast, but they actually slow and they touch down very gently on this roof. And this is, say, it's very large. It stretches for a half mile in every direction. And this is where we get the next strange occurrence, because now the inhabitants of the planet come into view.
Brilliant again. Smith and his very alien aliens. I love it.
Yeah, because these aren't creatures that all look the same. They're all very different. They're all different forms.
Not just in like in their sort of looks, but in their actual biological composition. So, you know, again, animal, mineral, or vegetable, or a mixture of all three.
Yeah, because they seem to have this like metallic skin or metal skin, or they're clothed perhaps in shards of metal.
Mm.
The commonest type among them was perhaps 5 feet tall, with a perfectly spherical head, which was joined without a neck to a triangular body that radiated on each side from a common centre 4 limbs that evidently served as both arms and legs, since all of them were used alternately or simultaneously in locomotion and also in prehension. This type had a single cyclopean eye, like a burning ruby in the middle of its silver face. So, again, quite strange looking, not just your conventional. Well, I suppose they're humanoid in the sense that they've got arms and legs and heads.
Yeah, when we get onto the actual features of the head, it gets even more outre, doesn't it? She got the above the rounded dome of the head were several glossy black antennae with vermicular segments, all terminating in tiny concave discs, and a short proboscis ending in a double mouth issued from the jointure of head and shoulders.
Yeah, I was just getting the impression of like ants in a weird way, that kind of feeling. But then also I thought this again put me in mind a little bit of the Migo with the feelers and the proboscis and that kind of thing.
Yeah, also slightly reminded me with the limbs and the antenna and stuff of the great race of Yith.
Yeah.
Also reminded me of them.
But now these things are closer, the crew very much get the sense that these are artificial shells of masks and armour, as if the entity is actually domiciled within. So there's almost your Dalek idea, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And even Roverton picks, talk about robots. Did you ever see anything like them?
I was going to bring that up. I love that. Talk about robots. Incredibly British, isn't it? I wonder if Smith was intentionally writing him as British. I mean, Roverton sounds British, doesn't it?
It's a sort of British type name, isn't it? Definitely. Yeah.
Sort of like a fellow of Cambridge kind of chap.
And these creatures don't just gather around the ship. They bring up a large tripod with a revolving globe on it, from which issued a long slender tube with a flaring mouth. They point the tube at the vessel's manhole and they basically get the airlock open and then come on board the ship.
Yeah. I've just got images of Roverton. Cup of tea, chaps.
So, chapter 3, because the airlock is open, of course, the atmosphere comes in and goes out. Volmar presses a button. He's trying to shut the door, but it's not working. Quick, the respirative masks and air tanks, he cries, with a voice that fought the asphyxiating elements. And now you get that impression. I almost got an image of scuba divers, masks and tanks on the back.
Yes.
It seems to be that quite fairly primitive sort of setup.
Yeah, length of rubber hose, that kind of jobby. Yeah. Yeah, because the atmosphere is humid and laden as with the hothouse odours of an ultra-tropical flora. Yeah, so you get that sort of almost greenhousey, composty kind of thing,
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a butterfly farm?
No, I can't say that I have.
Yeah, something like that. You get that sort of, decomposition, sweetness, stickiness kind of thing.
Ah, right. So these aliens just basically come on board, and of all the burglarious entries, exclaimed Jasper, no earthly safecracker could compete with these beings. It's very chipper, isn't it?
It's brilliant, isn't it? I love Roverton. He should be the star of the show, not Volmar.
And the aliens basically just come onto, I presume they're on the bridge or something, it's that kind of thing. The aliens all sort of crowd in and stand there looking at them.
Well, they gave no sign of hostile or unfriendly intentions. So, yeah, they're just like, what the fuck are you doing on our planet?
And they sort of indicate, they start to leave and indicate that the crew should follow, which they do, going down the vessel's steel ladder. They found that the throng had dispersed, leaving only a mere half dozen of the beings with globular heads and triangular bodies, who were manifestly a reception committee. And they're led off through a fantastic roof garden with winding spaces and pathways of stone. So this place, it's very geometric, isn't it? We see this a lot with Smith as well. The shapes are mentioned a lot, pentagons and triangles and squares. It's a sort of mixture of that geometry and colour.
Yeah.
He uses a lot.
Yeah, even in the creatures, the triangular bodies and circular heads. And yeah. But again, it's very vivid. You say to somebody a circle, they know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think it makes it easier to visualize. I think that's it shows his skill at painting pictures with words. Again, I think it's that poetry thing, because that's you've got to do usually in not so many lines. I think, you've got to conjure these images with words.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's succinct as well. And as it was spoken before about Smith's world building, within a few lines, he can create a believable world that you want to explore. And it's very much the same here. And we get an idea of the advanced science of these people because we come to the invisible airlift next, which was a nice touch.
Yeah, it's very 60s sci-fi, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
So basically the aliens step over the edge of the building and just gently float down as though borne on invisible cushions, and the crew are a little bit reluctant, but of course they all follow. And they're going down for quite some way as well, far greater than the height of any terrestrial building. So again, in my mind, this is a couple of hundred feet, a few hundred feet.
It's almost like Sky City in Cloud City, in Star Wars, isn't it? It's
yeah, and Star Trek as well. There was a city in the clouds, wasn't there, in one episode?
Oh, there was, yeah. BioShock Infinite.
And from there, they're led through vistas of quadrangular columns, more enormous than Dolomites. We've got that mixture again. We've got the saffron light. We've got semicircular portals. We've got chambers with septagonal walls. So again, that mixture of the colour and the shape. And this is where we meet, some kind of official, perhaps, or something, or important person.
Yeah, I see him as sort of like a governor kind of bureaucraty kind of thing, don't you? Yeah. And we've got another great line from Roverton coming up.
So this one is larger than the others, so it's obviously more important, because that's always the way that works, right? The bigger the hat, the more important the person.
Well, that's why, in a lot of historical dramas and things like that, like the governor or something is always a huge rotund chap, isn't it? Like an enormous bloke, you expect somebody to be like Brian Blessed if he was an alien,
So yeah, that's very much the impression you get with this being. It's got the vast dimensions of a bright orbicular head which seemed to overweigh his wedge-shaped body like a full moon ensconced on a semi-lune. That's nice, isn't it? That's like a big circle on a little sort of crescent kind of image, isn't it?
Nice.
And it's got one eye as well. They're all monocular. They're all cyclops. Perhaps that's where we've got an extra layer of cyclopean. That's a Lovecraftian pun. And it resembles a great fiery carbuncle. So he takes a look at the Earthmen, lifts one of his many jointed limbs and points at the bare windowless wall of the room, which then becomes a sort of screen, like a monitor screen.
Yeah.
And basically, he shows them their ship out in space, approaching the planet, descending, being caught in the tractor beam, and so on.
Yeah, he attaches an instrument to his head, a sort of circlet, which allows him to project his thoughts onto this screen, which is very cool, you know.
Yeah, it's a nice idea. And this is where we get Roverton again.
Yeah.
Good Lord. That was how they saw us coming. That optical instrument must have been a sort of long-range X-ray apparatus. I'm not sure the X-ray part of that. I'm not up on my science, but
no,
I'm not sure that X-rays are used to view things at a long distance. I'm not.
Well, I suppose X-ray was probably the most advanced and quite new, you know.
Yeah. That was the newest.
I guess they were still experimenting with what it could and couldn't do.
So this being then uses this apparatus to basically give them a history of the planet in visual form. And this is where we see that these beings, or we see the beings before they got their outer shells, so to speak. We see that they're quite similar. They've all got the globe head. They possess the more usual integument of hairless animal skin. In other words, they look more like organic creatures. And the sky in the world then was a greenish sky in which the sun Polaris burned like any other solar luminary, fertile and flourishing world. In other words, it used to be a, sort of quotes, normal planet.
Sorry, I'm going to have to take you down a little rabbit hole here and give you the history of the Daleks, because it's basically a parallel to this.
Oh.
Yeah. The home planet of the Daleks was once lush and verdant, and there was two races that lived on it, the Colleds and the Thals. And the Daleks were very sort of industrialized, and whereas the Thals were basically hippies. And a war broke out, and a nuclear war that basically decimated the planet. It just knackered it completely, and everyone was dying, kind of thing, radiation poisoning, blah blah blah. The Thals retreated into what remained of the forests and stayed unchanged, whereas the Daleks decided to embrace it, and their scientist Davros created these metal cases for them to be housed in their new form, as they basically metamorphosed into squids.
Right.
They're basically, because the Khaled mutant inside a Dalek is basically like a cephalopod.
Yeah.
It's basically an octopus in a tank. Yeah. So there you go, and it's very similar.
Quite literally. Yeah, and again, we have to wonder, is there some crossover? I mean, I suppose it's not out of the realms of possibility to think that a few people had that kind of idea.
Yeah.
But it is very, very similar. Was there was one of the Doctor Who films set on that, where they're outside the Dalek city? Was it Peter Cushing?
Yeah, the first Peter Cushing one, Doctor Who and the Daleks, because that's based on the first ever Dalek serial, which was the second Doctor Who serial in 1963, called the Daleks.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly what we get here, isn't it? A fertile, flourishing world, and long epochs of its evolution and the evolution of its people. So this is over a huge amount of time. We get that sort of cosmic angle there, the depth of time. But of course, then we get this period where the seas begin to dry up. The fertile zones were blotched with ever-spreading desert. The atmosphere became cloudless. It's almost like climate change, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And they begin to die off. So the scientists among them, they gather together, they put their brains together, and their solution is to, take the brains of the creatures out and encase them in these metallic, robotic outer forms.
Yeah, it's like RoboCop.
Well, yeah, and again, this is the Mego thing, because I actually checked when this was written in comparison with Whisper in Darkness, and they're pretty much the same time. So we can't say that one read the other and thought, oh, I'm going to pinch that idea. Maybe there was something in the correspondence they've been talking about this, but they both seem to use this very similar idea of brains being removed and encased in something at the same time. Interesting.
Yeah, it is, definitely. Yeah, it's a shame Terry Nation isn't still alive. I would love to know if this was an inspiration for Scarro. I really would. Because it is very, very similar. But yeah, that is definitely me-go-y.
Yes, so we have these artificial bodies manifestly controlled and animated by the living brains within them. And of course, as time goes on, then some people want a slightly different type of body. So within a short length of time, all of them had discarded their perishable anatomies of flesh and were habiting corporeal forms that were virtually indestructible. And you get the impression they're like customizing these, you know, no, I want red stripes on mine and I want wide shoulders, and you know, there's a bit of that going on.
It's almost a foreshadowing to the 1960s trope of, you know, the fear of spare part surgery, because that was a big thing in the 60s, wasn't there? A lot of body horror about spare part surgery. Yeah. And I guess this is kind of like a, you know, a foreshadowing of that almost.
Yeah, yeah. And it begs that question, doesn't it? If you, I suppose, I mean, cryogenics is a sort of part of that, this sort of quest for immortality and the fear of aging and dying. If you had the opportunity at some point to have your brain removed and put into an incredible robot, would you do it? I mean, I'm sure there's been other sci-fi things around that theme.
Well, that's, yeah, and it's that other sci-fi trope, isn't it, where you get the that kind of thing where if somebody's consciousness is uploaded to a robot, but are they still them? Kind of thing, you know. Yeah. It's
I guess now it'd be a transfer of consciousness, wouldn't it, into, well, you can talk about computers and even the internet and that kind of. So, I mean, the robot was at this time a fairly new idea, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Because wasn't the word robot, was that 1920s that was coined?
I think so. It was
the Czech, I'd have to check, I think it was a Czech author. Was it from was it from Metropolis, perhaps?
Possibly.
I might have to check on that, because that had that robot in it that they took C-3PO from, didn't it?
It did, yes.
Yeah.
Metropolis was great.
So it's picking up on a lot of tropes that are going around at the time, or perhaps it was just one of those things, as my friend always puts it, they were all just riding the same wave.
Yes, yeah.
Fritz Lang and Lovecraft and Smith, and I'm sure a few other people, all experimenting with this idea. And this science continues to develop and allows them to build these huge structures and everything else that the crew have seen so far, which brings us back to the present day, basically. Oh, and of course, we have this huge shield that's created and placed around the planet in order to protect it as well.
Yeah. It's basically to slow any more decline, isn't it? It's,
yeah.
Basically, it brought to mind the joke in Red Dwarf. Rimmer and Lister, I think it's in series 1. They're talking about how you never forget the day when sort of like JFK was shot, or the day they installed the giant toupee over the hole in the ozone layer.
the giant syrup in the sky.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to install the syrup in the sky.
Oh, there's another Star Trek Shatner connection, perhaps.
Yeah. It's not a wig, it's a tribble. Yeah.
Oh, bless him. Bless him. And I really love this bit where the crew are shown this huge history in the background and everything else, and Volmar thinks, okay, well, it's only fair I show them something of our history and background. And he comes forward and he sits on the tripod, and I sort of imagine him gurning and going,
yeah. The strain.
And all you get are these little blips on the screen.
Obviously, his brain was not powerful enough in its thought vibrations to affect the desired visualization. In other words, epic fail.
Yes, yes. So next to these advanced beings, these guys are like sort of cavemen or something, you know.
Yeah. I like the fact that it's Volmar. You know, Smith's written him as a complete numpty, hasn't he? I love it. It's just like, here's this self-important guy who's like, oh, show him. He just looks like a complete and total tit.
So that gets us into chapter 4, which is largely a description of the planet, because now they get taken on these sort of guided tours around the place.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed with this, it's all quite busy, isn't it? This might have been a dying race, but they seem to be thriving now, because wherever they go, I get the sense of crowds are moving about, or even described, it's like watching people in an office building working almost. There's a lot of activity going on.
Yeah, you've got quite a lot of diversity as well, because I mean, you've got he mentions here horticultural and ingenuity, because there's a lot of plants and all that kind of stuff. But some of them seem to imitate in their stems, foliage, and blossoms the form of novel animals, birds, and insects. It's it's really interesting. These guys are basically this Titan fungi as well, isn't there? Which bore architectural resemblance in their cinnabar or malachite or azurite tiers to pagodas and ziggurats. So you got temples of mushrooms. There's an idea.
There's another album name. Yeah. And again, it's all very imaginative on the part of Smith and very evocative. It's not just, it could have been, they've got tall buildings. You know, it's this nice mixture again of colour and animal, vegetable, mineral.
Yeah.
And it's so sort of dazzling that the crew are having sort of trouble taking all this in. The senses of the earthlings reeled in this blaze of inundating torrential light, this delirious riot of ultramundane form and supersolar iridescence. Their nerves were exasperated and then stunned by the continual impact of sensations which the human system was never meant to sustain. The vegetation seemed to dance like a sabbat of demons and witches, and the building they had left and the further edifices that overtowered the plain all staggered in drunken unison before their eyes. So they're having trouble taking this in, the scale of it and the colour and the shapes again.
It is all very psychedelic, because you've got all these weird and wonderful plants and mushrooms and stuff are rooted in ashen blue soil. So it is almost like a Yes album cover or something, isn't it? It's very prog rock.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Was it Roger Dean, the artist? I think those covers, that kind of stuff. Yeah, the colours turn up to 11, isn't it?
Mm.
And so we see the cities, we see parks, and then we get taken out over the jungle. These huge jungles, they're canals that run in straight lines, and the jungles seem to have the more primitive plant forms in them, laid out within metes and bounds like a vast botanical gardens. So it sounds like they're jungles, but they're sort of they're shaped.
Yeah,
you know, they're sort of restricted in some way. They're managed.
Yeah, it's all very landscape garden, isn't it? It's
yeah.
Reminds me a bit of a garden centre where you've got them different raised bits with, like, here's the rock garden, here's the you know, it's all very, or a botanical gardens, I guess. Yeah.
So I've got an image now of was it Incredible Journey where they inject the ship into the human?
Yes. Fantastic Voyage.
Fantastic Voyage. That was it. Raquel Welch, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And the few others. Yeah, it's almost that kind of imagery, I think, with this.
Yeah.
But of course, this being Smith, things can't stay pleasant for long. This is where we get a singular incident. And this now reminds us of the previous story set on Venus with the huge Shoggoth-like creatures.
Yeah.
Except these creatures aren't huge, they're quite small, but there's rather a lot of them.
Yeah.
Trees crashed down. There was a wild tossing of leaves and branches, and then, with fearful expedition, the foliage began to disappear and was interspersed with formless crawling masses of a loathsome livid grey mottled with black and red. Soon, in a spreading tract of devastation, these masses had devoured and supplanted all the vegetation and were steadily increasing in size and number. So I almost get the impression of, like, sort of leeches or slugs or ticks, crawling up and devouring. And as they devour, they're perhaps splitting in half, that kind of thing. They're multiplying.
Yeah, I'm seeing them as like, so my gran used to do a lot of gardening, and we'd have cabbages, and he'd come down in the morning, and there would be this path of destruction through the center of the cabbage patch. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing it as, these giant sluggy, shogothy things.
And the aliens, who, by the way, we have learned describe themselves as, or call themselves Tulungs, they do probably what your nan did as well, because they come in and start spraying the area.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And as they do, for the edification of the Earthmen, their guides flew lower still, where the monsters could be studied in detail. Here, all of them were wiped out by the lethal rays. And again, we get another one of those absolutely brilliant descriptions from Smith. They possessed no visible organs except the round sucker-like mouths with which they were entirely covered. Their substance was extremely elastic and without any rudiments of a bony framework. And they took from minute to minute a multitude of forms, turning themselves into gibbous globes or lengthening like serpents. So again, very Shogothy.
Yeah, they're like little mini Shoggoths, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I mean, again, I sort of got the parallel with Tribbles in some sense, although these are far more sinister and horrible. They're sort of Tribbles gone bad.
Well, gone bad.
Yeah, they're the anti-Tribbles.
Oh.
But that same sort of idea. They're not very big things, but the way they feed and the way they multiply is where the threat is.
Yeah.
And we get some more airships turn up with the Tulungs, and they start to drop a sort of vegetable pulp, which the organisms eagerly devour. And of course, this stuff is poisoned, so that's another way of killing these things and managing them.
Yeah, interstellar slug pellets.
Yeah. It's a big glass of beer, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So that's it. And these things all seem to have crawled out of a hole in the ground, which is sealed up by means of atomic integrators, which filled it with an adamantine material. So this is like, where are they coming from? The cockroaches or the mice or whatever it is. Right, well, let's cover that hole up.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, I've lived in a dodgy basement flat, and I had mice, and hunting the skirting boards, trying to find the way and point of entry with the bloody spray foam,
Oh yeah,
spray foam and a metal scouring pad. Yeah.
Wow. I think a mouse can get through like a centimetre gap or something, can't they? They can squish their bodies. Cats is the answer. Perhaps the Tulungs need some huge cats.
Yes.
That would probably set up another problem then.
Yeah, everything would be pushed off the edge of the tape.
And the whole place would smell faintly of wee.
Yes, indeed. Ammonia. Yeah.
So, having witnessed this quite remarkable event, they are now taken to meet the being known as Koum, Koum, which they take to mean king or emperor.
I love this here. In a voice more musical than a finely keyed and chorded dulcimer, the seated being began to question the guides.
Yeah, they get the impression that some sort of judgment is being passed on them.
Yeah, with this celestial tones like that. So now we've had geometry, we've had colours, now we've got music. It's engaging the senses. Yeah.
We're hitting all the senses, aren't we? Yeah. And it was interesting that earlier being they spoke to, he had a kind of fluting voice as well. So, quite musical again, which is another Lovecraftian trope for us, right?
Or the clangers.
So that's it. They have their audience with the king, and they're dismissed and led back to the ship, and they're allowed to get back on the ship. And that takes us into chapter 5. Mm-hmm. So basically on the ship, they get a chance to have a shower, shave, and something to eat.
Yeah. The 3 S's. Yeah.
Until they're summoned again And this time they're taken into a laboratory. So you think this is where things could start getting sinister, but it seems pretty straightforward. They're scanned, basically, I think.
Yeah, it's like they're taking some kind of image of them, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Numerous life-size drawings and diagrams of each man were made on huge sheets of a parchment-like material. The drawings began to reveal every bone, muscle, nerve, and internal organ. It was clear that the second set of eyes owned by the examiners was similar or superior to the X-ray in its visual powers. So you might think this was quite normal. The Tulungs are eager to discover more about the crew. But after that, nothing bad happens. They're taken back to the ship again.
It's kind of a subversion of your expectations there, because especially if you've read Mountains of Madness, and you know where the elder things come out and dissect some poor bugger to see how to pull him apart and put him back together again to see how he works.
Yeah, and it's kind of the aliens coming down to inspect you reversed, isn't it? Because they've gone to the alien planet and now they're being probed and examined and then put back on their spaceship.
Yeah,
it's an interesting reversal.
It is. It's a very good subversion of the expected tropes.
And then we learn they're here for days and weeks. So this is not like a short visit. In terms of the time it spans, it's not a short story, is it? They're there for quite some time.
Yeah.
And they get taken on more and more tours, and we get some more descriptions of the planet. We learn a little bit more about the Tulungs, that they're exempt from all the ordinary biological needs and desires. In their pre-metallic stage, they had respirated, eaten, drunk, and propagated in a fashion not dissimilar to other animal types. But now they need nothing more in the way of nourishment than the mysterious ruby-coloured fluid in which their brains floated. So again, it's the idea of they've got no physical needs. They've got these nigh on indestructible bodies, but are they happy?
Yeah. Well, just the line about propagation there brought to mind the Star Trek comparison. This would be the point in the story where Kirk went off and tried to get his end away with one of them, wasn't it?
Yes, it won't have a triangular body. It had a
curvy body.
Yeah. And it seems that they're all about science, these beings.
Yeah.
They have a sort of pictorial art and they have musical instruments, but all their compositions were meant to express mathematical or even astronomical symbolism rather than melody or harmony. They're definitely all about the science.
Yeah.
And then we get this idea that you'd think with all the knowledge they've got, they're free of danger or disease, that they should be stress-free. Yet such was not the case. Some of them of later years, notably the eldest and most learned amongst their savants, had been seized by a strange form of madness, a madness which did not affect their general powers, but was marked by antisocial impulses and actions. So they sort of turn to the dark side a bit, these older ones, and this is where we get those creatures from.
Yeah.
Because they start tinkering, certainly rapidly multiplying forms of animal, plant, or even mineral life devised by the madman had been loosed upon the red world at various times and had taxed the ingenuity of the confreres ere a means of retardation and destruction could be devised. And one of the most revered and fertile-minded of the Tulungs had himself gone insane and had created a new type of monster, half vegetable, half animal, which multiplied with more celerity than any other. So these are what they call the merms, and that's what they saw in the jungle. So these were not native to the planet. They were actually created by one of the Tulungs who's gone a bit mad scientist in his old age.
Yeah, you get a lot of that. I guess that concept of the scientist, the bored scientist, you know, again, it's a common trope in science fiction, isn't it? That you have these world-threatening things created by some bloke who was just bored. I'm actually worried that the end of the world is going to come from some guy who's basically bored in a lab somewhere. I know. Wonder what will happen if we cross this with this. That'll be a good idea.
Well,
you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's already going on in the guise of corporate or military or whatever stuff. But then again, that is that issue, isn't it? once we've conquered disease, and to a large extent they've conquered death even, what do we do now?
Yeah. It's the Umbrella Corporation, isn't it? It's that's what I see here. So it's Resident Evil and their bioweapons.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also that decadence. It's like the longer the civilization goes on, at some point it starts to turn decadent, and then that's when you get this deviation sort of occur. The de-evolution again idea, which we see a lot in Smith and Lovecraft and Howard.
Yeah, Smith loves to do his rise and fall of civilization stuff, doesn't he?
Mm. So, but the crew don't see too much of this. They learn about it, but you get the feeling that they're still taken on tours, but they're being shown the nice places on the planet, and everything is still very pleasant. But they start to get a little concerned, perhaps, or curious as to why they're being kept here, because they're not being told they can go. They don't seem to be prisoners as such, but they're not being let free. And they start to think, why are they showing us all this stuff? Why, they start to learn the language. Why are they familiarizing us with the planet? And this is where you think, I mean, again, the good thing with Smith is you think, where is this going? And at this point, I thought, oh, right, I think I can see where this is going now.
Is that this? They get that thing you get in films, and a lot of the time in fantasy films. Am I a prisoner? No, you're our guests. Right, mate. Yeah.
Like Dracula's guest again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have absolutely. A room. Don't go out of your room at night.
Mm.
And this is where we find out, because they get taken back to the lab. And this is where they see basically versions of themselves. Several of the Tulung workmen were just putting the final touches to a standing row of metallic bodies, which duplicated in every detail, even to the respirative masks, the clothed bodies of Volmar and his men. I like that they've got the respirative masks. That's interesting. Do they think these masks are part of their faces, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, I guess they're so used to being encased in these metal bodies. Maybe they think that they've done a similar thing, just at a more primitive level.
Yeah. And basically, they're told that the Coom has decreed that their brains should be removed and put into these metallic bodies. And it's almost like they're doing them a favour.
Yeah.
It's hoped by virtue of their ensuing immortality and long contact with the supremely civilized people of this world, they might develop into beings of a higher order of intelligence. It's kind of colonialism in reverse, isn't it? They've not come to Earth and done this, but when you go there, then we need to do this to you in order to raise you up our civilized levels.
Mm. My favourite Roverton line coming up in a minute.
Yes. Well, the crew are not happy with this, as all good Earthmen, Star Trek types would not be. Again, I'm sure this cropped up in Star Trek at some point as well, the idea of being made an android or something.
Yeah.
And again, you can have immortal life, but you're now part machine.
Yeah, several Doctor Who serials in the 60s and 70s revolve around that kind of premise. Again, it was that, at the time, it was that fear of spare part surgery gone mad. Yeah. Losing your humanity and things like that.
See, I wonder if this is kind of an age thing, because I picture all these guys as maybe 20s, 30s, 40s.
Yeah.
You get to 75, 80, 90, you might have a different perspective.
A different idea. Yeah.
Even 60.
Well, when everything starts creaking and even getting out of your chair to go and put the kettle on is like a supreme effort of will,
It's when you start making the noise when you stand up.
The noise, yeah.
That's the time. That's the time to visit Polaris.
Yeah.
Yes, and we get the marvellous Roverton line.
Of all the pickles, exclaimed Roverton, are we going to submit to this?
Of all the pickles.
Of all the pickles.
I mean, a pickle is like, my library book is a bit late going back or something. Or,
Yeah, in a bit of a pickle. I'm wearing odd socks,
No, said Volmar quietly. And of course, what does he do? He draws his gun and he shoots someone.
She does.
That's so great, isn't it? It's incredibly advanced planet, and it just always comes down to a phaser, doesn't it?
It's so human, isn't it? What's your answer? Punch it, hit it, punch it, shoot it. Yeah.
We come in peace, shoot to kill.
Yeah.
The surgeons and the aliens, they haven't got a clue what's going on. They can't really understand this. And they just say, proceed. So some of the Tulums come forward with these sort of anesthetics. And this is where we get one of them shot.
It's quite brutal, isn't it?
It is. Volmar pulled the trigger. There was a crash as a splintered crystal, louder and higher than the weapon's report, and the surgeon staggered back and fell motionless to the floor. A red fluid, brighter and thinner than blood, oozed from his shattered eye, bearing fragments of mineral together with clotted shreds of a greyish-green substance that must have been his brain. It's quite graphic, isn't it? Though?
It's the fact that he shot him in the eye.
Yeah.
He thrust his automatic into one of the surgeon's glowing eyes.
Yeah. It's not like a warning shot, is it? Or shoot him in the leg or something. It's like, bang, shoot him in the face. That's it. You're gone.
Yeah. It's remarkably brutal for a Smith story. Yeah. It's almost Robert E. Howard.
Yes. Yeah. Now, this doesn't go down too well. The coom strode forward with no sign of fear or dubiety, lifting a long tubular instrument with 3 mouths, which he aimed at Volmar, who in turn had covered the great diamond eye of the coom with his automatic. So we've got a sort of standoff going on now. The good, the bad, and the ugly. You can decide which is which.
Yeah.
And now we get a device that Smith has used once or twice before, where just as things look really bad for the heroes of the story, we get a huge dramatic event that turns out to save them. We get alarms going off and all the Tulums go rushing around in a panic. And we learn that the subterranean organisms there's been a tremendous breakout. There's been a huge surge of them up to the surface, and basically they're invading the Tulum cities.
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier when they were having one of the tours that there was a tremor and that they don't usually have earthquakes on this planet. And so that's a nice little foreshadowing right there. So it's almost like tremors, isn't it?
Yes. So that takes us into chapter 7. And Volmar says, well, what we need to do, we need to seize the platform. We need to get the airship. We need to get back to our ship, and then we can get out of here. So we get the sort of it's like in those disaster movies, isn't it, where they're running and the earthquake's going on or the fighting is going on around them, and it's always just like a yard or two behind them.
Yeah, it's brilliant. You've got these klaxons and gongs and these Tulums shouting randomness and running about. Yeah, it is pure disaster movie stuff.
Yeah, rents appeared in the floors and ceilings. The pillars twisted like reeds. The walls reeled in convulsion that never ceased but became more and more violent. But they reached the balcony, and there below they see the appalling sight. The sea had disappeared, leaving a rent and fissured bottom of bare, slimy stone at a vertiginous depth, and the cliffs were riven in tremendous chasms extending through the landscape. And as far as the eye can see, from out of the chasms, a horde of monsters was pouring endlessly, bubbling up from the depths of the planet in noisome and irrepressible ebullition. So that's a very nice image. It's almost like the sea has disappeared and these things have replaced it.
Yeah.
And of course, they're seething about the base of the tower. Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of those time lapse videos you get of like a rotting carcass.
Oh, with the maggots and that kind of stuff.
With the maggots, yeah, that's what that reminds me of. They come out like almost just like one goes boop, and then all of a sudden. Yeah. So
they managed to make the platform, pursued by a horde of swarming monsters. The coom they see is amongst the throng and he's grappling in a death struggle with 3 of the organisms who had fastened upon him with their multiple mouths. One has wrapped itself around the coom's enormous head and had muffled his whole face from sight. So he goes down, and what they see is this thing kind of drill into his head almost, or bite into his head, and that red ruby liquid comes gushing forth, and the thing is sucking on it and drinking it. Again, quite a graphic end and quite a nasty end for the poor old Coombe. I don't think he deserved this, did he?
No, no. Yeah, basically sucked his brain out. Poor bugger.
To see those creatures sucking forth the cerebral matter of the Tulungs like meat from a shellfish was enough to sicken the Earthmen for life. Fouled Sanro.
They're shucking an oyster, yeah. Nice. Brilliant image.
Again, I wonder if part of the horror of that is these highly advanced, civilized, scientifically advanced creatures just becoming meat.
Food. Yeah.
Yeah, for something that is obviously mindless and just hungry.
Yeah. It's almost Plague of Egypt like, isn't it? The Plague of Locusts kind of thing. It's yeah, great civilization brought to its knees by something that, you know, basically a pest, a parasite.
Yeah, yeah. It's got no thought. This isn't an invasion. This is just hunger.
It's just food. Yeah, it's just feeding. Yeah,
it's that impersonal thing that adds to that sense of horror, I think.
Again, it's that great cosmic horror thing, isn't it? It's they don't care that they don't care that you've got a wife and kids or whatever. They're just hungry.
There's no meaning. Yeah, yeah. So they make it back to the ship through all these scenes of destruction, great destruction. Towers are falling down. The creatures are all over the place. They get back to the ship, start the engines. Quick, we must start the engines, Volmar cried. A half minute of utmost dubiety and anxiety followed as Jasper set the machinery going. You can see the guy trying to put the keys in the ignition.
And then yeah, exactly. It's the horror movie thing, isn't it? You know, the car won't start. Yeah, absolutely.
But it does start and they get off. They lift above the tower. Even as it rose, the entire plane beneath appeared to collapse, as if the red world had caved in upon its hollow centre, leaving a gulf that was hundreds of miles wide and from which there issued a sound that was like the thunder of stricken planets. So, you know, it's serious destruction. It's Armageddon, isn't it? And this spreads to the, because we've still got the force shield above, but this destruction has spread to that. I guess it's being controlled by machinery on the surface or something like that, being projected by some generator or something. So when that goes, of course, so does the cloud. They go through this sort of darkness, a red cloud of unknown origin and nature. And then in a flash, they're out, they're free from that, and they're lifting into the cold light of Polaris. That red shell has gone, and they see this sort of red cloud. I suppose it's kind of disintegrated, and that settles down onto the surface. And I really like this last line as well. Its ruinous mountains and towers were beginning to re-emerge, and among them a dull and lifeless dust of dark copper was swirling in twisted columns, was dancing like a million devils to fall at last in a universal shroud on the dying world.
Yeah.
So that idea that this protective shield becomes the shroud of the dead world, it's very nice.
Brilliant. Again, just such powerful imagery. So,
and again, very visual, very filmic. You could see a film being made of that.
Yeah.
Probably be on the budget of a sort of Twilight Zone, wouldn't it? But with...
Yeah, I sort of see it with the aesthetic of like Disney's Black Hole.
Yes. So there we are. That's the Red World of Polaris, the second in Smith's Volmar series. I think, was there four stories in all, or five perhaps?
Yeah. Don't think one of them was published, but I think, yeah. I've got to say, just briefly, hats off to Nightshade Books. Hats off to the editors, Scott Connors and Ron Hilger, because we're on book 2, the second story, and I've spotted my first typo. That's actually impressive.
That is. Tim and I both edit anthologies and our own work as well. I certainly I have to proof all my own work, and I get as many people as I can to read it, but invariably, as soon as you get the printed copy, there on page 3, it says your YORE instead of YOUR or something, you know.
Yeah, there's always one, and it's always something really, really obvious as well. Yeah, this is just a missing letter at the start of a word. Yeah. So instead of were, it says ear. E-R-E. Yeah.
We'll blame the printer for that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, overall, these are formatted very nicely as well, these books.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't recommend these highly enough. If you're into Smith, you need these volumes. And of course, once you get them, you can follow along, right? You can read each episode as we cover it.
Indeed, yeah.
And do let us know what you think as well, of course. Now, what did Mr. Lovecraft think of this? I hear you ask.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, fortunately, he wrote a letter to Mr. Smith to tell him. So, this is dated the 25th of September 1930, and it's from open fields near Riverbank, so rather more mundane than some of the other locations we've heard. The Red World is ineffably fine, both in its absolutely unterrestrial strangeness of scenes and events, and in the cataclysmic drama of its final section. I don't recall ever seeing a better interplanetary tale. So there we go.
Nice.
That was HPL's thought on it, very nicely expressed. And yeah, I think he's right, the unterrestrial strangeness of scenes and events. But as we know, that's something that Smith does very well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, we've had some correspondence of our own, and one of our regular correspondents, Just Joe, makes up for that lack of the return address with his opening remark here. It says, "Salutations, O Batrachian sages of Saturn's rings." Love it. Yeah. Good to know you've been summoning some strange shadows again. I was delighted to hear another one of your discussions on Smithian weirdness. I was every bit as engaged in the Saturnian dreamland of Psychronash as you were. Smith clearly liked writing stories in which he could invent the entire setting himself. I wish more weird fiction went in this direction, instead of remaining modern and earthbound like Lovecraft and his imitators. By the way, did you know Smith expanded on the history and nature of Yaoundé in a letter to R.H. Barlow dated September the 10th, 1934? He offered this interesting bit on the mysterious elk goddess. Of course, we're talking about the story that we covered last time, the daughter Saturn. The parent of Yaoundé was the androgyne and animal archetype of Xiume, which still abides in that cavern of the archetypes, which was visited by the ill-starred Ranabar Vuz on his compulsive itinerations through the Hyperborean underworld. Xiume, a sort of nebulous and more or less spheroid elk. As to the marriage of Yaoundé and the flute player Nyarlathotep, I'm inclined to suspect that something of the sort is hinted or adumbrated by Phnom. I quote the reference, Yaoundé in the third cycle of her divinity was covered by that spawn which pipes, perennial the dire music of chaos and corruption. If this doesn't refer to the Azothonian flute player, I'll undertake to drink a straight gallon of the next Sega whiskey that is imported from Mars. Christ, Smith's letters. You need a dictionary for.
Well read, sir. Well read. Yeah, so Just Joe goes on to say, it's a shame this info never appeared in any stories. It sounds to me like Yaoundé is either one of the archetypes or a hybrid born from them. She herself might be a misty spheroid elk like her parent or something else entirely. I always assumed that as an archetype and elk goddess, she might have been responsible for the local populations of elk, animals which would naturally make a good resource for the Hyperborean people, and also a totemic symbol. In keeping with the sardonic spirit of Smith, it's entirely possible that she's unaware of her own worship, or perhaps she benefits from it in the same way Sartogua benefits from it. Her union with Nyarlathotep is even more mysterious. Did he mate with her and produce some eldritch hybrids that scattered across Hyperborea? Or is it possible that her union with Nyarlathotep resulted in the violent and intolerant inquisitions carried out by her priesthood? What are your thoughts on all this? Just wanted to give you my small but sincere support. Keep it up with your surreal explanations and all the dungeon diving fun. Well, thank you, Just Joe. You certainly raised some big questions there.
Absolutely brilliant, yeah.
And it's excellent because I've not seen that quote before from Smith, so it's really nice to see that that background information. And I think, as we mentioned with Lovecraft a lot, I think it's all off the cuff stuff, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think either of them has sat down and put like Cthulhu at the top and then made this family tree and this or that. I think this is them just having some fun again.
Yeah. Well, Smith did later, didn't he? He made that family tree.
Yeah, that's true, I suppose.
But that was a sort of comedy kind of thing. But that was later. But no, it brings to mind it's like, off the cuff world building, like, well, not more than that, off the cuff mythos building that like Lovecraft did in the letters we covered in the last Patreon exclusive about that statuette that Smith gave him.
Oh, yes.
Smith gave him this statuette, for people who haven't heard that episode, this wonderful abomination, and Lovecraft put it on his mantle and then proceeded to waffle on about it for about 3 months, and he built this whole mythology around this statuette. It's brilliant.
And it is. I love here that we had. I suppose the Hyperborean stories are Lovecraftian in the sense we have Sasogya. We became part of the mythos.
Yeah.
But then here he very firmly ties in Nyarlathotep as well.
Yeah.
As mating with Yunde, the elk goddess. Now, I always think when they say things like this, we can speculate as to the nature of what that might actually be. You know, in your mind, it's kind of like, well, did Nyarlathotep phone her up and say, "Thanks, going out for dinner"? You know, and my way of rationalising this, I suppose, is that idea is the closest we can come to putting this in human terms, if you know what I mean. The interaction between these beings is so way beyond our understanding.
Yeah.
That's our feeble way of categorizing what happened.
Yeah. There's a scientific term for when, like, protoplasmic creatures reproduces by splitting, and I can't think of the damn word for it. But yeah, I always see it like that. Because I've often wondered about, because me being me and my mind being the gutter that it is, I have often thought about Eldritch Abomination Rumpy Pumpy.
Yeah, of course you have.
Of course I have. Well, I was reading Brian Lumley, and he was talking about Cthulhu's hidden daughter, Cthulhu. Yeah, which is actually the main thing behind the video game The Sinking City, which I thought was really nice that the makers decided to go with Lumley's creation as opposed to Lovecraft's for a change. I thought that was a really nice touch.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but Cthulhu, give it some. It's a strange image, isn't it?
Well, you get into how are these beings created? Where do they come from?
Yeah.
Because everything. This was always the thing of. So aliens as a replacement for God in that sense. And by God, I mean, I'm speaking in the broadest terms, whatever people's religious beliefs. So you get the ancient alien guy, right? We were created by the aliens. And then you think, who created the aliens?
The Nameless Mist.
The Nameless
No. The Nameless Mist is all supposed to go back to the Nameless Mist, which is something to do with Azathoth. And also you have Smith's answer to it. Ubusathla, don't you?
Yes.
The unbegotten source.
The source of everything. But then it's the question, well, where did Ubusathla come from?
Yeah. Well, the Nameless Mist it's almost like it's a cosmic force rather than an entity.
Yeah.
It's like a product of the Big Bang even.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I've always seen it. But it's one of those things that's not been explored in great detail. But that's what I've always kind of seen the Nameless Mist as this kind of like, almost like a big bang that created these things,
Well, if we look at life on Earth, it starts in the oceans, and it starts with those protoplasmic forms, and it almost seems that life arises of itself. There's some process going on that I don't think we understand. And again, I caveat that with I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination.
No. Same.
We're artists. We're artists.
Yeah. But the primordial soup.
Yeah.
So I guess the Nameless Mist is the protoplasmic soup on a cosmic scale.
Yeah. And we know Cthulhu is from somewhere else, right? We can speculate, is that transdimensional or is it interplanetary or interstellar? But then does that mean somewhere there's a Cthulhu planet with lots of other Cthulhus on it? Once you start delving into this, you can go in all sorts.
Well,
of directions.
definitely. That's what I love about it. It's like Nyarlathotep himself is supposed to be from the Audian Void, isn't he?
Yeah.
Where or what that is another complete mystery that that I'm sure some more talented author than I will scratch that itch at some point. When I start getting into science, my brain melts, so I try not to go in that direction.
We need to get David Hambling in on that one.
I think we do.
He's a professional scientist and a mythos writer, so it's excellent. So thanks again for that, Just Joe. I think we've spoken a little bit about there, but that might be something we'll look at as a special episode sometime on the IBC. Perhaps we'll get a panel in for a discussion on the origins of the mythos.
Well, I think what we should do for a Strange Shadows thing, because we've got the letters with Derleth and Smith discussing the Cthulhu mythos, but we've also got that where he does the family tree of the great old ones. It's after Lovecraft's death. I think it was done as basically a homage kind of thing. I think he wrote it for a fanzine. So it might be nice to look at that one day, and we can go into that in great detail, and I can wax lyrical about Elder God Rumpy Bumpy. Yeah.
You heard it here first. All right. If you do have any comments or suggestions or questions, or if you want to correct our mad scientific theories, or particularly our pronunciation, then do get in touch and let us know. You can drop us a line at innsmouthbookclub@outlook.com. You can post on our Facebook page, and of course you can leave a comment on our Patreon page. And while you're on our Patreon page, please do take a look at signing up. We've got 3 tiers of membership for our patrons. Everyone gets a regular copy of Innsmouth News, which is a quarterly online magazine. You get access to bonus content not only for Strange Shadows for the Innsmouth Book Club. You get to vote in our polls for which stories we cover on the Innsmouth Book Club. You get free entry to events like the Innsmouth Literary Festival, and so on and so on. And of course, it does help us to run the show and to spread our tentacles even further. Big thanks to our existing patrons, and also to our new subscribers on YouTube. We're picking up a lot of new subscribers on the YouTube channel, so thanks very much for that. What are we covering next time, Tim?
Next time we're going to be looking at 2 fairly short stories, which we'd like to think we'd get through quickly, but we probably won't, because this is Smith and we'll probably go down various rabbit holes. We'll be looking at Told in the Desert and the Willow Landscape.
Excellent. Hope you can join us for that, folks. Thanks for listening. And with that, it's goodbye from me, Rob Hoyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.